My name is Jeffrey Frazier, and I'm one of the farm planners here at the Skagit Conservation District. When we talk about weeds, we must talk about management. Let's start with some general observations. Here are some general observations that could apply to all sites. First, evaluate the current management of the site. If the management stays the same after putting in great effort to change it, the site will return to the present condition. Here, examples of some management changes might include more cross fencing to allow more intensive rotational management, moving current fences so that different soil types are not fenced together into one unit, meaning different weeds can grow with differently in different soil types. Another example is, I'm sorry, close this window. The train's a little loud. Another example is creating a winter confinement area to protect pastures when soils are saturated and the grass isn't growing very fast. There are many different practices and applications for weed management. What are the landowner's main objectives? That's one of the main things that needs to be found out, is what the landowner's main objectives are. Would Joe, Bill, or Emmett like to comment before moving to the next slide?
Nope, I think you did great, Jeff. I don't have anything right now. I guess one question, Janice, if you don't mind me calling you by your first name, is there, just make sure and jump in anytime you want to wave your hand or whatever. I'll keep watching. And so if you have any questions, since you're here, you can just bring it up anytime you want to, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right.
Okay, next slide. Weed identification. There's no other way around having to get to know your weeds. The earlier the identification, the easier to get ahead of them. Well, I guess there's one way. You pay somebody else to figure it out. But identify the weeds of concerns. You need to identify the weeds. Are they annuals, biennials, or perennials? You know, take a pick and find out. There's lots of resources out there on the internet to identify. Some key definitions to remember: annuals live for 1 year, biennials live for 2 years, perennials live for 3 or more years. Ways to control weeds: there's mechanical, like with a mower; chemical, like spraying herbicide; and cultural, like overseeding, attempting to choke the weeds out, are just a few methods. Pasture management is the best way to prevent weed growth and infestations, meaning doing something to help is better than nothing at all. Herbicide control. Please refer to the Pacific Northwest Weed Management Handbook or contact your county noxious weed coordinator. You can find the links to those in the chat section. Eliminating weed seed heads prevents weeds from reproducing and spreading in the pasture. And that means basically when there's different times to affect different weeds to help the spreading of it. Would Joe, Bill, or Emmett like to comment before moving on to the next slide?
Jeff, when you're talking about annuals, biennials, or perennials, is there a different way that you should be managing those types of life cycles in those plants?
I would say yes. I'm sure that there's, depending on the weed and depending on what you want to do, then you strategize it out. It'll be, there's just different timing and probably different method. I don't know. What would you say? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think having good ground cover is one way to eliminate annuals, right? If they can't
Right.
they seed and you can't get down to the soil, then as long as you have good healthy cover, then you don't really have to worry about those the next year as much.
And I think what's interesting too is it's about the timing of the year too. If you can get through that time of year without that weed coming about, then you made it until the next year. I mean, because sometimes they grow. There's just different. How you see your dandelions in your lawn at early spring, and then you don't see them anymore. Anyway,
What are we looking at some weeds here in these different pictures, and
no,
climb and tell us a little bit?
Well, no, I wasn't expecting that, but if you look in there, the one to the right, it looks like there's some, little weeds starting to grow in there. I think that mostly it's just this was it wasn't a specific picture or graphical, but I think I know what picture it came from. So yeah, it is a grass field that is trying to identify the weeds at this age. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I just want one thing when it comes to pasture management and livestock is your livestock's normally going to prefer the grasses, the things that are sweeter and nicer, and they don't eat the weeds. And so that's one of the reasons the weeds have an advantage sometimes. And that's when we, because when we mechanical way of controlling weeds, browse is actually physically they're cutting them off, but they're not going to select the weeds normally. So that's something to think about. If the animal's on it when those weeds are coming up, they're probably going to generally eat the grass, and the weeds then will stick up out. They'll be higher. They'll be getting the sunlight and photosynthesis. So it actually boosts the ability for the weeds to get ahead of the grass because they'll just because they can do photosynthesis. And then on the biennials too, as I think we'll see later on, Jeff, you had that slide before, where there's two phases to a lot of these weeds. One is the first year is just a whirl on the ground. You'll see the leaves. They actually don't send out the reproductive, stem and blossoms and things till the second year. And so, but they start getting established. So, but again, if you do good pasture management and let the grass grow and maintain it between the desired height levels, then those whirls or the initial stage of a biennial won't be as strong, won't be as strengthful, and they have less chance of succeeding. So just wanted to touch on those two things.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. So I guess we're ready for the next slide. Okay, so while I was putting this presentation together, I came across these promotional and educational widgets that I thought had some really good information, and it would be a nice reference if somebody clicks back and they want to, look through this. I don't have too much on this, but to just say, that there's so many different weeds, depending on what you have, what you're doing, and then just trying to eliminate. Basically, you start with what you think it is and keep working until you find out what it is. What do you guys? Go ahead if you have anything to say about any of what you see on this.
Joe Shea is our Skagit County Noxious Weed Board Specialist. He's a pretty good resource. His main focus is knotweed, so if you have that on your property, that's something that they can often come out and control for free for you. There are some other really important ones that are highlighted here. Italian arum is resistant to all herbicides and mowing, and it spreads by corms, which are little bulblets, so it's extremely difficult to eradicate. That's something you probably want to reach out and get help with if you find that. And then Tansy ragwort's another one to point out. It's pretty common in pastures and lowland properties. It is a state regulated weed and you are required by law to remove it. And it also carries a liver toxin, which can be fatal if it's eaten in large doses. So it's certainly something you don't want to let go to seed, and you want to eradicate from your pasture as soon as possible. And that tansy ragwort is a biennial, so you've got a year to work on it before you get in trouble.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Scotch broom this year. Anybody else?
I will say too, you can reach out to WSU. They do have a biocontrol program where you can get free. I know they have a biocontrol agent for Scotch broom, and they have some for tansy ragwort as well, the cinnabar moth for that.
Excellent.
So a good alternative to use an herbicide for that.
Okay, next slide. And this was the same. I thought this was these grassy weeds. I thought this was interesting because, well, you can think you have grass, but then as the year goes on, it probably won't stay as sturdy as grass would be, and then you find out that you have a weed. And here's a few of these.
It's interesting. A lot of these are weeds in the classic sense that they're undesirable, but they might not necessarily be a problem to you. You know, white clover, that on purpose, but depending on your needs of your animals and what you require for diet and everything in your pasture, you know, you may not want them.
Yeah, that was a good point. Good to point out, because yeah, all these aren't a terrible thing. It all depends on what your goals are, what you're trying to do, and yeah, I agree. So it sort of depends on what state your pasture's in to begin with.
Right. And the next slide.
I just added this one in, was another one of those weeds, St. Johnswort, just because it's not a terrible thing, but it is a weed that if it's toxic to humans and livestock. It's more if a livestock eats too much, it becomes hypersensitive to sunlight. And so that's just one of those things, because I know it's one of those, like, well, gosh, I can buy it in the health food store. It's supposed to be good for me, right? But then again, for livestock, if they're eating way too much, it is one of those things. So it's another pretty little yellow flower. It's a lot different than tansy, but it's another one of those. If it's yellow, be something that you can pretty easily. It's not super dense, so it's pretty easy to just go out if you have a half dozen or dozen and just pull them out, and then dispose of them if they're in the seed form. But yeah, and the trick to identifying it is you can see on the leaf on the left, you can see little white dots. If you pull off a leaf and hold it up to the sunlight, the sun shines through those little dots, and so it's a real easy one to identify. But yep, just a little highlight. I like to highlight this one a little.
No, it's a good one because it can get bad within a couple of years if it starts growing somewhere and it's not taken care of.
Yeah, and a lot of these are important. We think of pasture and just having livestock on it, but also if you are have a field and you're haying, doing some hay, collecting hay, that it's something you wouldn't want to be getting super thick, right? Because it would definitely would lessen the quality of the hay having this weed or any other weed in there.
That is correct. That would be irresponsible.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide.
Okay, two types of tansies here. Tansy ragwort I just covered a little bit. That's that biennial that has the whorl in the first year and then flowers in the second year. Has those kind of pinnate curly leaves with purple stems, and then it'll create this very large aster seed head there. I would definitely handle that with gloves when you're pulling it out, because you could get some toxicity through your skin as well. And it's best to throw it in a garbage bag and dispose of it that way, or burn it immediately. Common tansy is another weed that we see often, particularly along riparian areas or in sandy soils. It has a pretty pungent odor, and it was actually called funeral flower in middle age England, where its smell is so pungent that they would put it on dead bodies to ward off flies. And it has these sort of little button heads on there. Fairly difficult to eradicate. It spreads by rhizomes as well as seed. But I think partly because of the odor and the texture of the plant, it's less likely that your livestock will be eating on it.
Thank you. Good information, because that's you can run into that one and the tansy. Anything else? Anybody? Comments? Questions?
Next.
Next slide. Oh, I don't have this slide. Okay, I'm caught off guard because I don't have this one on my. So I'm looking on my computer, but now I'm looking at the.
I think
can
we
take
just
this
wanted.
one.
I think we just wanted to put this one in here because this can be a real problem with your neighbors if you allow this stuff to go to seed in your pasture, and then it starts blowing all over the place and getting on your neighbors' pastures. So it's always good to keep control of it.
As thistles go, bull thistle is sort of one of our easier ones to eradicate because it's a biennial and it has a single taproot, as opposed to the Canada thistle, which is more common in pastures that spreads by rhizomes and fragments. And so it's very easily spread just by hoof action or by tilling the ground. This one you have a little more time to work on, and you can pull it right out before it flowers, and that's a good way to get rid of it.
So is this one of the one where it's if it's in a bad area and on a certain day it looks like it's snowing when that's blowing those seeds off?
Yeah, if you have enough of it, I suppose it could look that way.
Yeah, it's not as bad as cottonwood was last week and the week before, but it's definitely any thistle like that, because they are distributed via air through the wind. Yeah, you can see them a lot floating around. So I generally, most thistles, they're like Emmett explained, they're not as maybe as a big of a problem over time, but it's still, any of them, they do wide disbursement into, yeah, especially in Skagit County and all the seed growers, because a big huge part of our agricultural market is seed, high quality seed that gets shipped around the entire world. And so anytime we can stop, and minimize as much as possible any kind of weeds or undesirables. It's not just weeds. It's some parts of Skagit County you're not even supposed to grow broccoli, right? Because it can contaminate the neighbor's broccoli seed output, and so it's good to just try to maintain anything that could be distributed off of your site. And it's hard to be perfect, but at least it's a good goal to try to do your best, be a good neighbor.
All right, thank you. Good job. Next slide. Evaluate soil tests. I'm a big believer in soil tests. Evaluating soil tests or get soil tests taken. There is a relationship between soil nutrients and weed production. If you have a pasture trying to produce grass, and if the soil nutrient value is too low, then different weed species can thrive and choke out the desired grass. How can you manage your input of fertilizer without knowing which fertilizer your soil needs? You can contact your local cooperative extension, FSU, or conservation district office for information on how to take a soil test and where to have it analyzed. The top left picture is of a soil sample probe after being stuck in the ground and pulling it up. This is what you get that much soil to put wherever, in a bag or however they're doing the test. The picture below is of a soil test kit that you can do at home. I think I don't know which store it was, but I've seen these. I haven't used one, but they are available. And the picture to the right is one example of how the test results would look on paper. Would Joe, Bill, or Emmett like to comment?
Jeff, what are some of the more common labs that people use in our area?
Well, it's interesting because if you get it done from, so I guess when we called the, you called Skagit Farmers and I called Wilbur and Ellis, and we talked about the seeding. I wonder if they have a minimum of what they'll soil test. Anyway, that was a question that we'll need to kind of answer to, but so they take the test and then they send it out. There's, I don't know, what's the one in Moses Lake called?
So there's two main ones that a lot of people use around here that are, regional. That would be A&L Labs in Portland or Soil Test Consultants Inc. in Moses Lake. And they're both good labs, and there are other certified labs as well if you don't want to use those. Yeah, Skagit Farmer Supply will also accept soil samples, and I believe they send them off to A&L Labs.
Right, and I think that's exactly what Wilbur and Ellis does too. So just getting the soil, taking your own soil sample can be very helpful, but there's a strategy to it.
So I would think, it's, what are they, about $100 at $50. Is that right? You guys correct me. It's around $100 to $150. Is that right?
For a soil test right now, you can get a soil test with fertilizer recommendations from A&L Labs for the basic profile of macronutrients for $17.
Oh, really? That's okay.
So that gives you your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium.
It does, and I believe sulfur, calcium, magnesium, organic matter, pH. So some of those basic things that you need to know.
So that's less than that's, what is that? Like, that's same as an expensive January bale of hay, right? I mean, you could pay. So I mean, you think about it, that's not very much money to save, because especially if you got a few acres and you're trying to figure out how to manage it, you can probably double or triple your production of your food on your own place, right? For a small investment. Is that the logic behind that, Emmett and Jeff?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Jeff, when's the best time to take a soil test?
In the fall or early spring, I would say. I mean, before production and after.
Yeah, in the fall, September or early mid-October, before we get 3 or 4 inches of rain is a good time. At that time, you can sort of assess how did you do over the year in terms of your nutrient application. Do you have too many nutrients left in the soil? Or, did you do a good job of matching with what the plants are going to uptake? And that's also a time of year when these more volatile elements like nitrogen kind of settle down. You can get a more accurate reading of what's there. In the spring is another good time, just like Jeff said, if you're trying to plan for what fertilizer you need to put on your crop as you're planting.
How about the importance of, in Western Washington, the importance of pH and how, because we get all the rain, what do we usually do about pH in our soil where it's real rainy?
Go ahead, Emmett.
Sure. Yeah. So pH is a measure of we're looking at proxy elements such as calcium and magnesium, and we get a pH of neutral, which is 7. That's where grasses tend to thrive the best. Rain is really good at washing calcium, magnesium, and nitrates down through the soil profile, making those unavailable for plant uptake. and that reduces the pH, so it makes it more acidic, and that causes other elements that are important for plant nutrition to be less available. They tend to bind tighter to soil particles, and so they're unable to be taken up. So managing your pH effectively is really an excellent way to give grasses the best head start and the best competitive advantage and nutrient availability. So in our area, we're looking for ideally somewhere between 6.2 and 6.8. That would be a really great place to start. If you're starting to see a lot of moss or buttercup, that's an indication that you may either have a very shady and wet site or you have pretty acidic soil. But taking that soil test can give you a good recommendation for, do you need pH and how much do you need? And we typically recommend not applying more than 2 tons per acre in one application of agricultural lime, because otherwise you're just sort of wasting money at that point. It can't really be readily absorbed at a higher rate. Quite a large volume of lime.
Yeah, I think that's something I probably need to do this fall. There's a lot of buttercup, and so you take the soil test first, and that would tell you how much. And then
Yeah, in your case, I think mid to late September would be a great time to take a test, and then you can ask for that recommendation on how much to apply on there, and they'll tell you that on the test as well. And then you can really application anytime. It's non-toxic. I mean, most people will generally keep their animal off for 1 day, but a lot of it is applied as what's called a flour. So it's dusty, and just to prevent wind loss and anything like that. It's nice to be able to do it when a truck can still get out in the field, but right before a rain, so rain can settle it into the ground.
Okay, all right. That sounds good. Yeah, now that we have that winter confinement area, I can keep them off. So yeah, so I'd like to do that. Yeah, my dad just clipped on Monday and it was pretty yellow out there. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I think that, and I brought that one up, little focus on that, because you can, with animals on the ground and applying their own manure and what you're feeding them and harrowing that in and things like that, you're getting, generally you can be getting the nutrients, but the pH control is something you have to bring in. It's harder to do just with how you manage and rotate animals. It needs that lime, that additive to do that.
okay. Thanks.
Nitrates are pretty likely to be washed out in the winter. So that's why we want to look at fall tests to see how much is left. And ideally, we're looking at under 30 parts per million. If you take a test in the spring, you're likely to see very little in the single digits of nitrates. And that's just because it's been washed out. So it can give you a good idea of what's left and how much you should be applying.
Excellent. All of it, even everything. So that is the end of my presentation on my end. The next slide.
We're hoping to do some on-farm tours later this year. Hopefully get out to visit a few sites and show people what other folks are doing in the county. What do we have for next month for our virtual work?
Yeah. So there, yeah. So we'll, how do I water my livestock? So we talk about the off-stream watering options and or other watering things. And how do you, just keep it safe and healthy for them to get water? Then we're in August, we're going to try to do a field trip. Yeah, try to pick a site where we're actually live out on somebody's farm and talk about things and using our cell phones to do some real life stuff. Just so you know, Janice, we haven't field tested that yet, so we're reaching out. We're trying to do something different with that one. So so that'll be a difference. And then again, another one in September, so soil health organics. I think one thing we haven't talked a lot about today is just maintaining your grass and mowing your grass and the heights. So just touching on it, you're pretty schooled on this, but you're always trying to maintain your grasses between 3 and 6 inches, because that's optimal heights where they can outcompete weeds and grow, and you keep them from going to seed, because if they go to seed, then they're not as robust. So, and then let's see, yeah, optional we talked about in October, just how to plan projects, whether it's permitting or building animal cover or whatever you do in the off season. So we wanted to get in and allow people just to do a little brainstorm on helping people how they schedule their other non-actual pasture things, but all those parts of a good farm plan and a good farm operation that helps keep the pasture healthy, because like your heavy use protection, those kind of things are also part of the discussion. It's not always just about the pasture property, it's about those other parts of an operation that you have to include to make the pasture work. Okay, let's see. So do you have any questions, Janice, that we may not have covered today?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the other thing besides the Buttercup is quite a bit of Canadian thistle. And this spring, part of the pasture was rototilled when they were after they'd done all the digging. But yeah, like you said, they just came back in full force. Didn't matter that that rototiller had gone all over them. So, but I know they're not poisonous, but yeah. So that's the other thing I'm trying to figure out how to get less of.
Well, you guys have been doing an excellent job of clipping them to prevent seed. So I think that helps somewhat.
Yeah. And I had tried digging them a couple of years ago, just, one by one, but yeah.
But that biological treatment, Emmett, that was one of those that was there, right? That was accessible for that. Is that right?
I'm not 100% sure on Canada Thistle, but that's certainly something you could check with WSU, and it's like the link to their biological control program is in the chat right now.
Sure. Yeah, you got that. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'd try that out and see, because that might just be a good way. And there's probably an optimum time of year too, right? Because if depending on whether it's a larva or flying or whatever it is, there's probably a time of temporal element to being successful in that.
Yeah, and I know I have a little bit of common groundsel, the one that has the little yellow flower, and then there's another one I need to identify. It has the whorl on the bottom, but then it has it goes up with little white delicate flowers. So I've been digging that one up too, but I need to find the name for that one.
I think those tend to both be associated with bare ground with compaction. And so as you're improving your pasture management strategies, rotating animals around and keeping grass on there, you should see those start to go away.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there's not much the groundsel, but yeah, I could tell where it was kind of gravelly at the top of the pasture. That's definitely where it's growing. So yeah. And then is some of the little bit of pigweed, sorrel type. And those are hard to get out because the root is so. And then of course the what is that? The swamp grass.
Juncus, yeah, reeds, Juncus offusius, yeah.
And keeping that clipped so it doesn't prevent seed heads, and then the lime. Those are two pretty good strategies done in tandem that can help to.
Okay. Yeah, my dad has clipped twice now, beginning of May and just at the very end here of May. So yeah, that's definitely looking better. But.
Yeah, I would think about photosynthesis too, and any your clipping again, as long as you're, whether it's the sorrel or anything, if you're clipping its weeds so it can't produce photosynthesis or do photosynthesis, it's not reaching its roots for reproductive purposes. And grass, if you're doing the 3 inches, the grass is still there and healthy. So the grass will start doing better and out competing, and those other weeds, as long as they're not having broadleaf or their ability to do photosynthesis, that continues to weaken them in the ground as well. And so it takes several generations, to weaken it so much it doesn't come back. But it's what is successful with blackberries and things like that. As long as, especially if it's at that point reproductive stage and you cut it off before the seeds go to actually are viable, you're you're killing that right now when all that energy is up into fruit. It's doing everything it can to reproduce. And so there's nothing left to go back into the roots. So you can really, it's putting a lot of stress on those things that you don't want by continuing to clip.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm gonna appreciate all the help you've given, and yeah, I'd focused earlier on identifying all the bad stuff, and then Emma especially was helpful for identifying some of the good stuff, not necessarily in the pasture, but just in the forest areas around. So that's been fun. Working on the blackberries too. So yeah, and
Sounds
Excellent.
good. That's half the battle.
yeah. So,
Well, you know,
yeah.
you can call anytime you have questions.
Sure, appreciate that. Yeah. And talk to the county. So when they came through doing the mowing, they didn't do it as radically as they've done it in the past. So to try and keep some of the good stuff that's growing on the hillside, especially. So
Good.
Yeah.
They have a tendency to mow everything. One, in fact, those are, stop that from sliding in that one spot there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any other, you have any other questions for us?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I'm trying to keep that the dogwood, the 5 plants that I planted are doing very well. In some of the smaller ones, it's kind of hot there right now, so I'm basically watering daily. And then the other ones on the top of the hill, the snowberry, and most of those are doing really well as well. So that's
Well, great. Next fall, I have other dogwoods still healed in here. So next fall, if some don't make it, just don't hesitate to reach out, and I can pull some more of those I have healed in and drop them off sometime.
okay. Great, thanks.
Sure. Yeah, I like to see them have good homes because
Yeah.
my house gets overgrown. Take care
Okay.
of it. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, surely appreciate you coming and helping and being part of this today. We didn't do very good advertising, so it was just one of those it was a COVID condition, I think, again. But we'll do better as they go throughout this summer and get more people. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
All right.
Right,
Okay.
bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great day. Yeah, stay cool.
You. All right, you too.
Do you want to stop recording?
I'm going to stop recording. Stop recording. Take a picture of Jeff. It says, can you please take a picture of Jeff? Even though this. He wants